Good day, everyone. My name is Gail Rutkowski, and I'm the former executive director of NASTRAC, currently retired, but as I told my panelists, I'm just doing fun things now, and this is one of them. I wanted to thank our host, Transact, for bringing you two webinars during National Women's History Month. Women's History Month is a celebration of women's contributions to history, culture, and society, and has been observed annually in the month of March since 1987. This year, our theme is celebrating women who tell our stories. Our webinars feature and honor women in the supply chain, as well as the general business community, who have devoted their lives and talents to improving our industry and encouraging and mentoring young women entering the field. Although women have made progress, there are still areas where women face obstacles because of their gender. For example, women still earn less than average on average than men, carry a majority of the household and childcare responsibilities, face workplace stigmas and double standards, and are underrepresented in leadership, STEM careers, and politics. Our first webinar featured C-level women who had broken through the glass ceiling to lead their companies. Although there were many takeaways from the webinar, the two that stand out to me was that each woman found time every day for themselves. And the other takeaway was to be mindful of our words, that words matter. Today, we're going to be speaking with another group of accomplished women who overcame many challenges and obstacles to achieve senior management positions within their companies. They will share their stories with us and discuss the opportunities that lay ahead for those who will follow them. Now, I'd like to ask our panel to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about their lives. First up, Ms. Meg Duncan, Director of Strategic Sourcing at Koch Logistics. Meg?
Hey, good morning, everybody. I'm currently in St. Paul, Minnesota, in the snowbanks with the rest of us up here in northern Minnesota, and very, very proud to be a Minnesotan despite all the weather events we've had this year. I've been with Koch companies for 16 years and came on board as a manager of carrier relations and then moved up to be the director of strategic sourcing where I am today. Prior to that, I was with what was Roadway or YRC Worldwide for 24 years and started as a billing clerk. So I guess you could say I know the business inside and out because I've done just about every job from the carrier side and then coming on board with Koch to round that out. And it's been a great career, fast paced, just like everybody else. And I wouldn't have changed it for the world.
Thanks, Meg. And next up, Laura Eory, Director of Transportation for Kind Snacking. Laura?
Hi, everyone. Laura Eory. I've been in supply chain for 16 going on 17 years now. Mom of 4 and recently joined Kind. Will be coming up on 2 years at the end of the year. And yeah, I'm really excited to be here. So hopefully I'll be able to add some perspective to that mom element, excited.
Great, thanks, Laura. And Heather Shell, Vice President of Sales for JB Hunt. Heather?
Hi, I've been at JB Hunt for 18 years. I've had a variety of roles from engineering to pricing to sales to leadership. And currently lead our entry-level sales team and have a lot of fun with that role. But I live in Fayetteville, Arkansas. I am a mom of a 2-year-old, so our house is a good time right now. And I'm married and really looking forward to the conversation today.
Great, thank you, Heather. And next, LaDonna Thornton, Assistant Professor of Supply Chain, Harbert School of Business at Auburn University. LaDonna?
Hi, everyone. So I have been at Auburn for 5 years as an assistant professor. Prior to that, I was at Florida State and I was at University of Nebraska. And then prior to that, I actually worked in industry for about 8 years. And one of the weird people that majored in supply chain or whatever it was called back then, about 20 years ago, and have stayed in it in different ways over the course of my career. So
Great.
I'm excited
Thanks,
to hear
LaDonna.
too.
Okay, Meg, first question to you. What was your first job? What was the landscape and culture when you began your career? And how has it changed?
Oh my, well, like LaDonna just said, there were no supply chain degrees back then. I took a job with Roadway as a billing clerk to work nights, and I thought I was going to go back to school and get a a higher degree. And then I found out how fast-paced logistics was, and they started promoting me, and off I went. So from a billing clerk for a year, and then back in the day, Roadway had a training program. So you worked your way up through the company, basically. So I was a billing clerk, and then an OS&D clerk, and then a dock supervisor. And I think they had a meeting one day and said, let's see what happens when we put her in sales. And they gave me a briefcase and a car. And the person whose territory I had, Pat Mackey, left to be a terminal manager in Iowa in 2 days. And I was on my own, and they trained me 2 months later. So that's kind of it's not like it is today. Now they have all the, the tests for your sales aptitude and everything like that. And it certainly wasn't that. And you would drive around, and knocking on doors and seeing where freight was and build relationships with customers. And I did obviously extremely well. I did local sales, corporate sales. Back in the day too, to be in corporate sales, you had to be a terminal manager. So I was a terminal manager in Duluth, Minnesota for 3 years, and ran Duluth, Thunder Bay, Ontario, and Grand Rapids, Minnesota. So I was single until I was older. So I didn't have children, and I was working, midnight, 2 o'clock in the morning, opening the terminal. It was just a job to me, and it was very fascinating. And I just did extremely well. When I got in corporate sales, that was a little different. Obviously, at that point, they did a lot of training, and that changed. But coming up through the ranks, what was different was I was always one of 2 women. One of 2 women in local sales in Minneapolis, one of 2 women who were terminal managers. There were no mentors higher up, because we were kind of the first ones out back in the day, right? And when I got in corporate sales, again, one of 2 women in corporate sales. So a lot of my mentors coming up were men, and they recognized talent. And I think that I was very fortunate in that aspect. When I came over to Koch, I was pretty much fully trained on LTL, and then had to task myself to learning the other modes, truckload, parcel, dray work, international. I had a little bit in that. And you had to go outside. So I really pushed myself to go outside and find organizations like CSCMP and like NASTRAC, the Minnesota Freight Advisory Council, different things to increase that knowledge, because there were no programs back then. And that's how you had to network to find that information and to improve your knowledge base.
Great. Thank you, Meg. And I know you've been a great supporter of those organizations throughout your career. Laura, what about you? How'd you get your start?
It's crazy thinking back. A series of small decisions seem to have led me where I am. I thought I was going to study international business and go live and work in Japan. So I was taking Japanese as a freshman in college, and landed as an intern for Federal Highway Administration, which is a division of the Department of Transportation. And the senior intern there said, I think you'd be really good at supply chain. You're really good at solving problems. You think differently. I said, all right, I'll give it a shot. So I ended up in supply chain that I'd never heard about. My dad was in sales. My mom was a homemaker. I think I'm the first one in my family that went into anything that wasn't insurance, teaching, or farming. So it was one of those things where you had to pave your own way. Michigan State has a great program. So I, was very lucky at what I decided and where I was at the time. But I've definitely seen some things, building off what Megan said. I've seen some things even in that internship where the senior intern was a male. He graduated. He had gotten some accolades. I had built a database for all procurement for all states of Federal Highway Administration, and left that summer for an internship at Kraft Foods, came back, and they had given all the credit of the database I had built to the junior intern, who happened to be a male. Now, he's someone I still talk to, great guy. I don't think it was anything malintended, but it was, I remember walking in the division head's office and saying this is unacceptable. And I did end up leaving over it. And I think that, it's a small lesson, but I didn't expect in college to have something like that happen. But I was I was one of 2 women in the office, that wasn't in like a support secretary or administrative assistant role. And I think that it just really struck me. Ended up in transportation with Kraft Foods because of my Federal Highway Administration experience, even though I had left, but they wanted me in transportation because I had this experience. And it was like everything kind of kept following this path. And here I am today, again, back in transportation. I've had very few incidences like the one I described, but have been fortunate, like Meg, to have some really great mentors coaching me, both women and men, and people even at companies I've been at that said, listen, I'm here for you and to help see you succeed. And whether that's here, I hope it's here, but if it's not, I'll support you anyway. And just really felt like I had some people in my corner. So that's the differences I've seen, along my career from an intern all the way up. But it's especially in transportation specifically, you'll notice a lot that, especially at the senior levels, you're one of very few women even today.
That's very true. Very true. Thanks, Laura. And Heather, would you like to share with us your first job?
Yeah, I took a little different path. So my degree is in engineering. And so I came to JB Hunt as an engineer. And I picked engineering pretty intentionally because there weren't a lot of women doing it. And I thought, oh, I can stand out as a female in kind of a male-dominated space. I think I can really do something, and I think it can be exciting. And I was raised in a household where my mom ran the PBS station for a state. And so she had an amazing job, and my dad had always been wildly supportive of her. And so I grew up thinking that being a female and standing out and having your voice be heard and recognized and appreciated was not only important, but common, not realizing that might not actually be common. And so coming to JB Hunt and just wanting and being an engineer, I realized pretty quickly I didn't want to be an engineer long term. I wanted to get into the business. I was lucky, I think, especially as I hear more stories about the industry, that JB Hunt has always been pretty wildly supportive of females. And that speaks now to the fact that our president is a female, and Shelley Simpson. And so there have always been women leaders around me, but definitely not at the same pace as male leaders. And so it was interesting when I would step into the business and spent most of my career in sales, how different it was, and some of the feedback, and just really the industry was different. And being a young female as a salesperson, which, I was a 25-year-old selling in transportation, that's when it really hit me that, oh, there aren't a lot of people like me. And while I have always been taught you have to pave your own way and people are going to support you, and even if they don't, you've got to figure it out, and you are special and you can do great things. That was the first time that it really hit me that, oh, this industry can be a little bit more harsh to women, and you've got to figure out what boundaries you're going to set and what that's going to look like. And I would say that over time, here we are 18 years later, the industry is different. That doesn't mean that there's still not room for improvement. There's still not things that we can change, but there are so many more roles in transportation and supply chain than there were when I first started. And so it's been really fun to see it evolve. So, and where it's changed.
Great. Thank you, Heather. LaDonna, I know you've had an interesting path. Share that with us, please.
Wow. So my first job, I was an operations development associate. I came out because, again, I was a supply chain major, or whatever it was called back then. I graduated from Ohio State, and I went into a rotation program, which I was quickly escorted out of that program because they needed supervisors. They needed supervisors, and they needed us to graduate from the program quickly. So the company I worked for was a medical products distributor, a large one, Cardinal Health. And my first job was a distribution supervisor at a warehouse in Boston, Massachusetts. And I say that because I am a Midwesterner born and raised. So
good for you.
moving to the East Coast was a different experience. And that was how, I learned the difference between what was in the book and what was really going on in the facilities. And so I did that, and then I did that for about 4 or 5 years. And then I became a fleet manager in Baltimore and ran a trucking fleet. And most of my environments in Boston, there were women, but my colleagues that were the same level of me were men. And then in Baltimore, surprisingly, there were several of us that were managers. I was the only female transportation manager, of course, for the fleet. And I had a colleague that ran one of the distribution center managers was a woman. And eventually my boss was a woman. So there were more women showing up later that had basically gone through the ranks like I did in different ways. But I would say my mentors, when I think about it, my mentors were men. My mentors were the men. They were very supportive and helped me understand like what was going on, especially that first job. That first job when you're first figuring out how to manage people is really intense because they don't do anything that you think they should. So that part surprises some people, but yeah, my mentors were primarily men when I was in that career. But I will say running a trucking fleet, being a woman and being a manager of 45, 50 drivers that were all men was definitely a challenge. And a lot of lessons learned there. And it is nice to see that there's starting to be a lot more women that are doing this. But at the time when I was in that role, they're just actually running a private fleet. There wasn't many. I think within the company, there might've been 2 others in different regions from me. So we didn't really interact very often, but we were very rare. We were rare.
I know, LaDonna, you and I bonded over how we started, because we both started in private fleet, and that's how I got my start as well. I'm interested to know, though, you pivoted from the boots on the ground fleet operations to academia. How did you make that switch, and how did that come about?
So I tell this story to my students because they're always like, well, why did you leave? So my company it's a non-union shop. And we went through multiple Teamster campaigns in a year. And I'm not pro or against union, but it's just when you go through a union campaign as a manager, it is extremely taxing. And to go through it twice. And both times, the guys I had, they didn't want a union, but they knew, they could use that as leverage to negotiate. So, going through a labor discussions, and it was just a lot in a year. So at that point, I was like, maybe I need to think about what else can I do? Because at that point, I also wanted to move up and, figure out what my options were. So I applied to go to school and got into Vanderbilt, which, hey, don't turn that down. So when I went, surprisingly, I was ready to do something different than working with a fleet and working in the distribution center. I wanted to expand out. And similar to Laura experience, when I left, the guy that replaced me, he got paid a lot more than I did, even though I fixed a lot of the things. And he's a great guy, and I don't begrudge him that, but it made me look at things a little different. So I found that when you are good at running a fleet or running a distribution center, that tends to be everything that is offered to you. They want you to go back and do the same thing. And I did not want to do the same thing. I still wanted to be in operations and I still wanted to do that, but not in the same way. And fortunately, I met a friend of mine recommended I go to this conference where you learn about PhDs. And I was sitting next to my future advisor on a plane, and we got to talking and we hit it off. And he explained to me what being an academic was, and that I could research all the crazy things that I saw in my job and understand why people do the things they do and figure that out and still work in the area that I liked and not necessarily, and just approach it from a different perspective. And getting a PhD, quite honestly, was never on my radar. I'm a first generation college student, didn't even think about PhD. And now it's a great, I'm glad I did it. It's a great life. I still get to see, I just went to the ProMat conference. I get to see all the new technology that's out there and still get to be involved with it, but just in a different way.
Great.
That's
Well,
how
thank
that
you.
pivot happened.
Okay, now I want to pivot a little bit more and get into just kind of work-life balance issues. And given the assumption that the higher you are in the supply chain, the more flexibility you may have, how do you handle work-home life balance? Maybe some of the moms out there want to give this one a crack. Laura, Shelley? Laura, you've got a ton of kids.
I have a ton of kids. Some of my coworkers have jokingly called them my gaggle of children. So my story is a little bit different. In that I've done some moving, and my husband has moved with me, and I'm not sure of the other ladies on this call, but that's been my experience, and it's a little bit more rare for the other women I've experienced. Climbing for some companies does require relocation, especially if you're going to stay with the same company. It really depends on the situation you're in, but I've been very fortunate that my husband was in HR and then recently pivoted to a teacher, where I've been afforded a lot of flexibility and support by my spouse to go and do what I wanted to do. I was brash enough to tell him that, though, so he knew what he was getting into, to be like, listen, I want to have a career. I want to, be leading a supply chain someday. And he was like, great, I'm along for the ride. We had 2 children in Wisconsin. We were married. I was like 22 when I had my first. So my son is now 14, going into high school next year. I have a 10-year-old son. And then we decided to relocate to Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania was an opportunity because at that time, Kraft Foods was splitting into 2 companies, Kraft and then Mondelez. And I wanted to go with a growth company. And in your career, if you can ever look at a growth company and go that way, it'll be hard work, but the opportunities are phenomenal. As it being, Kraft was more settled. They ended up getting bought by some other organizations and then combined with Heinz. So I was in a great position. Literally, though, interviewing for that role, it was 3 positions higher than my current role. It was going to require me to move, and I was 10 months pregnant. And when I say 10 months, I think they interviewed me, and 2 days later, I had the baby. And then 3 days later, they said I got the job. And they're like, but wait, you can go and check out, we were going to move to Wilkes-Barre, PA. He's like, you can go and check it out. Don't make any promises. I'm like, I have a 3-day-old, I'm not going anywhere. You're not getting me on a plane. I'm not leaving my baby. So I just took a leap of faith and trust some of the leadership and said, you know what, I'm going to do it. And I think this is the right call for my career. We moved to Pennsylvania with the 2 boys. So at that time, my son was 3 months old by the time we actually trained a new team. So I hired a team while I was on maternity leave. I know you're all shaking your head, but I wanted to be involved in it because it was going to be my team. And I was literally starting a department from the ground up. So I was in a situation where sometimes I was changing a diaper on a phone call, trying to figure out things. I was a part of the interview process. And we hired a team while I was on maternity leave and then brought them to Wisconsin, where I was living at the time, and trained them up. So I'm telling you this story because I had to take some really dramatic leaps of faith. I was really, really lucky to have some people who believed in me and knew that I would figure it out regardless. And so my family and I moved. Pennsylvania was really tough for us. I loved Mondelez and the team because we just started a new team. So we were all new. We were all moving from Chicago or Wisconsin or other places across the country to come and start this Mondelez like operations hub for the company. And so that was fun. And it was part of just, you'll have times in your career you look back and go, that team was the most fun team I've ever worked with. And I did so much personal growth in that role. But what I realized is that I started to be called the transportation girl. So I thought, well, this can't be. So I said, I saw a sales position, which is crazy. And by the way, I should never do sales or procurement. It's just not my personality. But I took the leap. That leap of that interview, I got exposed to some people who didn't know who I was, figured out the experiences I had, how articulate I was, and said, you know what, we're going to give this to another person, but we think we have something else for you in another department. So it was really cool to see how sometimes you take those leaps and then you say, I'm not happy with that. And you take a different path, and it might not lead you where you think you're going, but it gets you exposure to something else. When we landed in New Jersey, because I was driving back and forth to New Jersey from Pennsylvania for almost a year for a short-term role to get that exposure for that idea that guy had, and 2 hours one way. So I would drive 4 days a week and then stay home on Fridays with my kids. It was really hard on my family. And I looked at myself and said, this isn't the life I want. So I said, either you guys are going to give me a full-time role or I'm going to go back and work in Pennsylvania somewhere, maybe doing transportation again. It didn't matter. And they offered me a full-time role. And the lesson is sometimes you have to stand up and say, you know what, this isn't working for my family. Because I think as women sometimes, and maybe men do this too, I'm not sure, I'm not a guy, but sometimes you look at it and you're afraid to speak up and ask for what you want. Sometimes I've felt so grateful where I've been in life and thinking, wow, I have so many people like really advocating for me. You don't want to upset that. And I'm a people pleaser. So it was hard for me to say, excuse me, like this isn't working anymore. And so we ended up having 2 more kids in New Jersey, but I ended up in New Jersey because I raised my hand and said, this isn't working for me and I need some help. And New Jersey, we adopted my daughter from foster care. We became foster parents. And then I had my son. And it's been really great. And I've landed at some other companies since. But those decisions in that path, and speaking up and saying I'm not satisfied with my career and I want more. It's just a really good lesson to say there's times when you want more in your career and you have to sacrifice your family, but there's times you see that you want more in your family and you have to be willing to sacrifice your career. So, those are some things. Luckily, I've been lucky. I landed in areas of increasing responsibility even as I did these things, but it's been really hard sometimes with kids. But again, having a spouse who's really supportive. My husband and I don't have like support people around us. We're in a state that we don't have any family in. So the only other piece of advice, Gail, and I'll finish it up, I promise, is I get a good support network of friends and don't be afraid to hire stuff out. And then to do all those things, kind of have an idea of what you need in a salary to make all those things happen. If you need house cleaners, if you need someone to drive your kids to place, like whatever it is that you need, and don't be afraid to ask for help.
I think that's the biggest lesson. What a great story, Laura, but just that you actually spoke up for yourself, and women sometimes have a difficult time doing that. We tend to think, well, if we just be quiet and someone will notice us, but that doesn't always work.
Yeah.
Heather, this one's for you. There's been a lot of controversy about women being held back. Some use the term punished in the workplace for having children. And given that the US is the only advanced country in the world that doesn't guarantee paid maternity leave, what do you feel is needed to help advance the cause of women today?
Yeah, it's, tough question, a lot there. And I would say, it ties very much back with what Laura, talked about. And I think so for my career, and kind of just the reason I think the way I do, my husband was also wildly supportive, similar to Laura. I said, this is what I want out of my career. And we focused on my career. And as a result, talking about the moving, he is often, because he's well thought of at his company, he's often asked to move, funny enough, to New Jersey. And he has to decline because my job is here. And we've really focused on my role, a joint decision that we both came together to talk about. But we held off on having children because I was in a role where I traveled 50+% of the time in sales and transportation. And I knew with living in the US and what maternity leave or family leave looks like, that, and I saw with some coworkers, I didn't know how I would leave a newborn and at 6 weeks or 8 weeks. I knew I couldn't do that, even if I wasn't quite sure at that point if I wanted children and what that looked like for me. We delayed it because we were so intentional that I wanted an amazing career and I wanted to continue to move up the corporate ladder. And I personally did not believe that in the US, given everything that it was possible for me. And so, it was one of those where, funny enough, I always said, hey, when I make it to VP, we'll talk about it then. And then I got to VP and I was like, ooh, still don't know, still not sure. And it's like, you never really know. And now, so we did have a child and it happened to be in COVID, which probably was the best case scenario, I think, for me, because I was so used for, frankly, the majority of my career, 12+ years, traveling 50% of the time. And so I had to slow down. I had to be at home. And I actually took 6 months off when I had my daughter. And JB Hunt was amazing enough to work with me on that and allowed me that time off. And it was life-changing, is what I will say. And it opened my eyes to the fact that women have to come back to work after 6 or 8 weeks, maybe 12, but then it's unpaid, potentially, is mind-blowing to me. You're not physically healed. You are not mentally or emotionally healed. And it is wild. And so I feel fortunate enough that we were in a financial place where we could do that, but I know that is not possible for everyone. And the toll that it takes on a family, not just the mother, but also the father, and thinking about what that life looks like as they come back. It was very eye-opening for me, especially as someone who, as I just very clearly stated, intentionally deprioritized having children to focus on my career. So it's interesting because you say, what do we need to do, to hopefully help this situation? And you said earlier in your question to Laura, in transportation, it's often thought that the higher you go, the more flexibility you have. I do think that's true. Flexibility looks different. And it's really not work-life balance, it's work-life satisfaction. And that changes over time for what you need and want out of life, which Laura mentioned. But when you're new, you're learning, and you likely need to be in the office, a set schedule. You're working with your peers, maybe your customers, your carriers, your drivers. Everything is a little more intense on the hour by hour, minute by minute level. Whereas the flexibility I have now, I might come in a little bit later because I dropped my daughter off at school, but I might stay later, or I might work at 8 p.m. at night while she's in bed. And those are hours that people don't see or necessarily know about. I'm still doing all of the work. The schedule looks different. And that is something I have been afforded as I have moved up. So it's not that the hours you work are total time. They may actually even increase a little bit as you promote up. And I would say they likely do. But the hours, the day that you get stuff done and where you get it done may look different. And I think that is something that, if you are having children, is something you have to consider, especially just given the time off that we do allow to new moms.
That's a great point, Heather. And I really appreciate hearing that, because I made a decision not to have children because of my career, and I traveled for the time, and it just got too crazy. and my life just kind of like just was out of control.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
I appreciate those of you that are able to do it. God bless you. I'm just the greatest aunt in the world, so I just kind of just deal with that. I'm happy with that. I've got my sisters had kids, so I can play with them.
Yes, a role
Meg,
I enjoyed for many years.
oh yeah, exactly. Meg, what about you? You have grandkids now, don't you?
I do. I do. I have little squirrels. They're 2.5 and they get in everything, right? I just, I want to make a point. Like when I was in corporate sales, that was a great job. I loved that job. My son and daughter were in junior high going into high school, and I was traveling. And the opportunity for Koch came up, and it caused my husband and I to kind of take a pause and say, wait a minute, this could actually be a good thing. A difference in the career, a different focus, new things for me to learn. You know, I enjoyed the networking and expanding my horizons, but being gone that much was taxing on our family at that age. And I took that opportunity to step in here at Koch and change my career, obviously, to a 3PL. I had been asset-based carrier for 24 years. That's a long time, you know? And my son said to me, where are the trucks? Mom, you just gave up the best job in the world. You traveled, you got to go to ball games, you got to go to, you know, customers with dinner. You know, that was his view of my job. And I said, yeah, but this is a better fit for us as a family. And when you talk about that balance, I've always been about work-life balance and things on the personal side that have satisfaction as much as my career, even outside of family, personal things. And it was the perfect opportunity for me to do that. And it's worked extremely well. But that was a very conscious decision that my husband and I made at the time, and a very good one.
Now, LaDonna, we've gone from one end of the spectrum to the other. You're about to be a new mom.
Yeah.
I'm sure you got some good advice here, but what are your thoughts?
It's funny because I'm similar to Heather. I waited a very long time. Some of it by choice, and some of it I didn't have any control over waiting to figure this out. You know, I've been on the side where you don't have kids and you're expected to do things. I remember getting an email. I was like, well, since you don't have any kids, can you go do this dinner? I was like, well, no, my plans are just as important as other people's plans. Just because I don't have children doesn't mean that I'm the one that has to go do everything. So I've lived that part of my life for a very long time.
Mhm.
And now, having about to become a new mom, I still feel very strongly that that's not fair to those other people. And it's an interesting shift in terms of career, because even though, you know, even though I'm in academia, we're at universities, there's the same, you still worry about the same thing about having kids during your career, before tenure, or you don't know what they're going to think about it. How do you know, how will this affect their perception of your seriousness when it comes to research and publishing, and if you can get the work done? And there's still all of that worry here. And honestly, depending on the university you go to, it varies. Some are very supportive, some say they're supportive, but the actions speak differently. I'm very fortunate that I'm at a place that, you know, when I told them, considering, so I had infertility issues that I was dealing with as well. And I was at a place, I was being here. They've been wonderful. I was very lucky. They were very supportive of everything that I had to deal with and go through, and are just as excited about, you know, my child coming as I am. And I'm so fortunate for that, because I know a lot of people are concerned and they worry about that. And the way that so funny enough, though, my university, I think we just got we just got maternity leave maybe a few years ago when I started here, like a real maternity leave policy. So I will be able to be off for 6 months. I won't teach in the fall. I'll be off for 6 months, which is great and it's wonderful. But it is kind of crazy that we just got it maybe 4 or 5 years. That's considering. This place is a very family oriented, and it's a hard decision because I made the choice to do this by myself. It was like, well, I'm dealing with infertility, so I, got to make some decisions here. So having a strong support network. Fortunately, I, convinced my sister and my nephew to move down here with me. So my sister works here as well. And I have friends that are like my little village that are all excited and willing to help me get through this. But it is still, when you make that decision to wait longer, there's a lot more thought that goes into how you're going to structure your life now and what is that going to look like? How am I going to work? I don't have the financial worries necessarily that I would have had when I was younger, but I'm hyper aware of all of the expectations of me in my job and what I have to do to maintain that job, so that there is a little bit of pressure there. But I realize that my schedule is going to have to change drastically. I will be doing things on different time frames, different times, everything will be different at this point. But it's not a decision I regret at all. It's the way that life panned out for me, and it's the path that God wanted me to walk. And, when I think the question was to help advance the causes of women. That was the second part. I was thinking about, having children and like you said, going back after 6 weeks like that. How do you do that? Personally, I feel like there's a mental health aspect to it. When they start to consider the mental health of women and the psychological safety of women, that we feel comfortable and we feel supported in that environment around our health and mental health when it comes to dealing with our families, that can help advance. They'll understand better why we need to advance some of those things, because happy employees perform better. If they're happy, there's all this research, if we're happy and we're supported, and we feel like you care about our family and our well-being beyond making you money, then we will be better employees. So looking at it from that perspective, I feel like that can help advance it.
You brought up an issue too that I've experienced in my career, not having children. I was the one, well, she doesn't have any kids, she can do that. And you start to get a little resentful, and you're like, okay, I know that kids are important, and I know that a mom needs to stay home with her sick kids. I get all that, but I also have to do the work that's not getting done. Yes. Because you're home. And I think the answer really, it's really easy to blame working mothers or whatever. I know my sister, who was a stay-at-home mom, was very resentful when her neighbors asked her to watch their sick kids so they could go to work. And that's not why she was staying home. But, and you start to resent one another, but when really the answer lies out, in my opinion, the answer lies outside of us. And the answer lies with affordable and available childcare, with adequate enough maternity and parental leave. I think those are kind of the issues, and to advocate for those issues, I think, are probably a good step forward. I'm seeing some nodding heads, so I'm guessing you'll agree. But it's not going to be easy, and it's tough to get that stuff done. And the more women I think we get representing us in the political spectrum will help as well.
Well, the one thing I'd add too, Gail, is that, for those of you watching that are women or want to be a leader, when you leave, give permission or be fair about that. I think as much as we're discriminated and we have things that we still need to get, and I know this is about women, but men are dads, and people have plans, right? And giving people, when you're in a position to be a leader, permission to say, you know what, at 5 o'clock, if you're done, you're done. Or if, you know, and be as flexible as you can, or be really clear with your team when you're a leader, especially supervisor, maybe of hourly people, be like, hey guys, if we reach this, we can go. Or, you know, you have something going on, let's see what we can all do to pitch in and help make that happen. It's really, really important to give people that permission to like leave and know that their plans, whether it's regarding kids or not, are all equally important. And being those leaders of the future so that we can change that. Because I think it's really hard. It's even hard on men to leave, right?
Yeah, and you see that more with men in the industry. The first time I had a male carrier rep tell me he couldn't stay and work on my problem because he had to go pick up his kid. And I was like, what? Are you kidding me? But again, you know, I think the dads are starting to feel that. And I think the men coming up too are much more attuned to this issue than we had been in the past. So you're right, you're exactly right. Laura, I want to stay with you for a minute. During our pre-panel call, you shared with us an exercise about using badges as an icebreaker when discussing diversity.
Oh yeah.
Badge examples of single white male and single mother or gun owner were some of the badges used, which could be a little shocking, but can you tell us what you took away from that exercise and how it affected your approach to your job?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So I was, I lead Women at Kind. So I work for Kind Snacks, and we are starting KRG ourselves. So our women's KRG actually launched this year. And we had a panel, and one of our HR people, who's an amazing facilitator, she said, I'd really like, instead of us talking about the years or, you know, all the roles we've done, let's talk about our badges. And we're all like, badges, what do you mean? So I there's an article that, you know, I can send, or Gail, I think I shared with you, but it talks about wearing the badges of who you are that people can't see. So you can see I'm a woman, right? You can ascertain maybe a range of my age, and I'm not asking for anyone to guess because I do have gray hair here. But there's some things you can see that are visible. You can see I wear glasses, but you don't know I was a foster mom. You don't know that I'm a sailor. And when you start to really expose yourself by these badges and be really open and honest about who you are inside, underneath, and all the different things that people can't see, what's very interesting about panel conversations or even conversations with your team, it exposes a sense of vulnerability and the real you. And what women do so well, like so well, it's a skill that I think we underutilize sometimes, especially in leadership. Women leaders can be really great because we're good at that. We're good at finding those underlying things and exposing ourselves in a different way. And so badges allow you to lean into that, I think. Kind is really interesting because we're actually, I think we're almost 60% women, which is kind of crazy. I've never worked for a company like that, and I'm really, really proud of that. But these badges really expose everyone. And yes, the controversial one, you know, a proud gun owner, and there's some political undertones, I think, in the country right now that I don't want to get into. But what's interesting is that really, it makes things very real, because there's things people hide. And sometimes you can uncover them in conversation, but sometimes you can't. And you're always like, gosh, I don't, you know, there's something off, or there's something that they're not really sharing. And you don't know what it is, but you kind of tell that maybe they're not being their whole self. You know, LaDonna just said she had infertility issues. That's not something you would ever see. And, you know, you think some women make choices to not have kids, or some women make choices to do certain things. And there's a lot of layers to every single one of us, a lot of onion peels to get to the heart of who we really are, what's important to us. And those badges, especially at work, can really help do that. Obviously, politics aside, you have to be careful because we're all in business, but you want to be your authentic self. And the more you can be your authentic self, your team can be their authentic selves, and you celebrate differences instead of using them to pit each other apart. It can be really powerful in collaboration.
Interesting exercise. I don't know if I'd be able to handle that. It's a little strange, but let's talk a little bit about Well, before we leave this topic, when you look around today, aside from, and we've already talked about childcare and parental leave, but what issues are still troubling in terms of women advances? What other issues do you think need to be addressed or spoken about? And I'll throw that out to anybody in the group. Everything's wonderful. Okay. What about the salary issue? You know, and I know that this isn't across the board, but when you look at the data, it says, and some of it's because of maternity leave and that sort of thing, but how women just don't tend to make as much as men in this similar roles. We don't see it, and what's interesting is you don't see it at the hourly level. Women that are truck drivers are generally going to make the same amount of money as a man. Women that are in the trades, again, electricians, plumbers, are going to make the same money. But when you get into management, it's a little more subjective and not quite as carved in stone. Any comments on that issue?
I think that women over the years have gotten into a job that they like, and they haven't pushed, right, to get their salaries up. And I think what has changed, or what I've noticed, is that they're now willing to take the risk and move to get to that higher salary. I think men were more adept at that in the past, on hopping around, right? And I think that has become more frequent for women, and good for them. I've worked, at 2 companies, and it's been a very good career. And I don't think I know that when I left my former employer, Roadway, I was very much under salary in corporate sales compared to my male counterparts. And I think when you look at why that was, it was just when you got promoted up into something at a certain percentage above what you were making. So to catch up, it would have taken years and years and years, right? I think that some of that is going away, and hopefully that's being recognized, but that is an issue.
That's a good point. You almost start out behind the ball.
I've noticed that too. I actually think I started out pretty well, but what's difficult is you do have to move around a little bit to then negotiate those salary terms. You also have to know your worth. And I think we're not very good sometimes about saying, but wait, I've done manufacturing. Has other people done manufacturing? I've done this, I've done that, and really explain to them, not I need it because I need childcare, I need, whatever that is. No, I'm worth this. And I think sometimes our male counterparts are not afraid to say that. I think we have to be better about knowing our worth, and also, do some research, look at Glassdoor, have an idea for your region, what others are paid for those roles, understand the range. And if you're behind, you also need to talk to your boss or the hiring manager. They have to be able to advocate to you sometimes to HR and provide other positions. And in the past, I don't know if you ladies have done this, but I have provided other positions on LinkedIn that are posted that I could get a salary range and say, you're under the range. And it almost like real estate. Have you guys ever bought a home and like the realtor gives the mortgage company, like, here's 3 comparable, get 3 comparable roles and say, this is what this position is worth. But I think you have, I don't know, Meg, if you have as much bargaining power. I feel like the larger corporations, it's tough to get promotion or salary raises without actually getting a promotion. So I've always used that promotion to negotiate and leverage. I haven't ever done it in role. And I think that for me personally, that would be really tricky. So I'd be willing to learn from you or others that could suggest that, but I've always used the promotion to help me get that leverage.
Mm-hmm.
I think, Laura, you even kind of mentioned this and Meg touched on it, but typically females don't interview up multiple levels. You talked about like it was, 3 levels or 2 levels above probably what you deemed yourself qualified for. And I even see this in my husband, which is an interesting perspective. He'll interview for something that I'm like, oh, I would never interview, like I'm not qualified for that. And women downplay their skill set more.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that it's important, especially when I think about coaching our young females, of, you said, know your worth, know your value, but also taking that risk on yourself. And so having a mentor who believes in you more than you believe in yourself is so wildly important, because they will encourage you to interview up for that position that maybe you don't think you're quite qualified for, which then, to your point, might get you that position, gets you into that higher salary that you're wanting for. And so you do have to know. And I think one of the most important things we can do to change this is, you mentioned, at larger corporations, but we need an HR staff that provides governance for this and is ensuring that there is fair and equitable pay across genders, and is saying, hey, this person has maybe the same tenure, they're at the same level. Why are you choosing to pay them less? Let's talk about that. But I really think that that is a step that every company should be making, and is hopefully an easy, unbiased way to start fixing this issue. Aside from the things that I, mentioned about making sure that females feel empowered to interview up, ask for what they want, and take a risk.
Those are great points, Heather. One of your colleagues, Tammy, was on our previous webinar, and she was talking about a great statistic that really made an impression on me, and everybody was nodding like, oh yeah, I've done this. When people go to apply for a job, let's say there's 10 requirements for the job, a woman must have at least 6 of those before they'll go. A guy will go, or a guy only 6, he'll go. If a woman doesn't have all 10 or maybe 11, she will defer and not do it because she's not perfect. And men tend to take more of those risks. I thought that was an interesting perspective
Oh my
on
gosh.
that as well.
That is the research, it shows that we feel like we have to have every single qualification, and men are like, oh, I'll learn it on the job. I'll figure it out. Sure, I could do whatever you suggest.
I remember being told women need to be twice as good to get just as far.
And
it's
so,
true.
Yeah.
One thing I wanted to say, Heather, you talked about HR and the role that they play. I was never a big fan of HR because they were never very supportive when I was coming up. And really, in their defense, neither was their role. But there was a VP of HR that I really liked, a company I worked for in Memphis. And one time I said to her, I really don't know if I should be looking for a job or not. Should I be going, should I look somewhere else? And she said to me, and I will never forget this, you should always be looking for a new opportunity. It's the intensity of your search that varies, and you should always know your worth. So I really appreciate, Laura and Heather, you really hammered that home. And if anybody takes away anything from this webinar today, know your worth and do the work that's required, the research, to know what that worth is. So that's great advice. You all spoke about mentors, and I want to talk about that for just a minute. Back when I started, similar to Meg, everybody around me were men. So they were the only mentors I had. Unfortunately, I had some amazing male mentors, never had a woman mentor. So those of you that had both of those options, is there a difference or is there not? Who would like to share that, take that one?
LaDonna, you go. Yeah.
So I will say, during my industry career, I've only had male mentors. And now as an academic, I have women mentors as well. And there's definitely a difference. The women, there are certain things that, let's say, happen. I'm like, did I read this wrong? No, they're like, no, you didn't. Or how to navigate like with what I was going through with infertility, how to navigate that, and having a mentor that could relate and could understand and to the issues I was dealing with as a woman and working has been wonderful. Like it's been invaluable. And the men that I have, they felt compassion and empathize, but they couldn't quite. There's a difference in the level of understanding on how to navigate what you're dealing with at times. And I also would like to make this thing. I think you should have mentors, but you should also have advocates, and those are different things. And that's kind of what I've learned, that not everybody is made to be a mentor, but some people are very good advocates and will sing your praises. And that's what I've developed more now. And they advocate in different rooms and different spaces for you while your mentor, and I do recommend having both. I think it is good to have both men and women. Your mentor is able to help you navigate those issues that are unique to your situation. So Heather.
Yeah, no, I think you nailed it. That's what I would say is I've been early in my career, my mentors were men. And it was interesting because I was a young female. They really played that fatherly role for me. And I moved away from home and was living in a new state, a new city, and I needed a bit of that fatherly role. And it was amazing for me. It's what I needed in that moment in my life. And they stayed mentors for me for my entire career thus far. And I laugh that there's one who I've never taken a position without running it by him first. So he is a mentor. He also happened to be an advocate. He was the one who said I should go into sales and really saw that in me. But having male and female mentors are so wildly important, not just for females, but for men. One of the things I see now, like outside of, because I think LaDonna just nailed that answer, is I'm often only given young females to mentor. And I'm like, no, there's so much that men can also learn from a female mentor. And it goes, and I don't just think about my young females, pairing them up. I'm very intentional now that I've seen it happen to me, that when I get a young female who says, hey, I'm looking for a mentor. And I always say, what do you want to be mentored about? Let's find someone who can help you with that skill set, whether they are male or female, because that is what you are working on. And sometimes that skill set, if, thinking about LaDonna and what she was going through, a female mentor on certain areas, especially around infertility, that's going to be the connection point. For other topics, that person who might be the best fit might be a male. And so I think that's really what we have to think about. But that's one of the things I really challenge organizationally myself, because I don't want to fall into that, is making sure I'm not just pairing up by gender, which is something that can be very easy to do, and pairing up by skill set. Good point.
Laura or Meg, any comments?
LaDonna and Heather really nailed it. I think that when you have an advocate, it can be, and I guess this is just my perspective. I've had mentors that are men and women. I've had men help me see the leaps that I took. So most often when I took the most risky leaps of my career, that were the hardest, I grew the most, but they were definitely the hardest, and they fundamentally changed who I was. I had a male mentor helping coach me through it. When it was a topic, and being in a male dominated industry, I think sometimes I have some more gruff traits, which is why I said I could never probably be in sales. What is very interesting is that I actually use some of the women mentors I've had in my career and even in my life to really help me soften my tone, because I feel like I've had to be, so rough and so really direct. And now that's my personality. They've really helped me understand how I come across to both, and help me soften those things. So I agree with Heather, and it happened to be women that did that, but I've used those mentors in very different ways. You also have to trust this person, and you have to value and look up to them. So, if you have a mentor that you don't look up to, that maybe has been assigned or something like that, like, be empowered, get somebody else. You're in control of your career, and some companies do a really great job of mentor programs, and they assign you someone. If you feel like it's not a good fit, the conversation doesn't flow, it doesn't feel authentic, go find somebody else.
Good point. We just had a question come across, and it's interesting, and I want to share this. As a father of 2 young daughters, I'm grateful for what you shared today. I'm committed to being an ally and learning how to better support my family. Despite progress, studies show that young women are experiencing more depression. Can you advise me on raising independent, confident, and authentic daughters without overprotecting them? Good question. Anybody want to take a stab at that one?
I can take that one because my daughter is 27 and a very empowered young lady with 2 little babies now. And I always gave her the opportunity to find her way and to not hold her back. And I think that's one of the most important things. If they have an interest, don't hold them back and be supportive of those choices. And that's can be very difficult because you have to let go of that control as a parent, right? Now I'm doing the same thing with a 10-year-old granddaughter and 2 new babies. So as it goes on, and one thing I want to note on that mentorship, Gail, and this could apply to when you're talking about, having daughters too, is that I was always tasked to be the mentor for the women in the sales group or in the operations teams or whatever. And I always felt that wasn't the right thing to do because you want to find the right mentor, to everyone's point. And I mean, this was, 20 years ago. And I tried to push back on that as the person who was being told that I was going to mentor these 4 or 5 women because I was the successful woman. And it's just really important to find that right fit. I never had a female mentor coming through. I mean, there weren't any. So it's not that I wouldn't have found one that would have supported me in what I wanted to do, but I found the women that supported me in the industry, like Gail, when I started networking and going and getting involved. And that's what you should probably encourage your daughters to do, is to find those avenues for success and support them in that, whatever, if it's ballet, it's ballet. If it's band, it's band. If it's, track or running or, academia, whatever that is, you need to support that decision and just make sure they have the right things. Society is so hard on young women and what they're supposed to be and what they're supposed to wear. And, it's just really, everything is on the outside, right? And you can't get past to find those badges. At that age, that's very difficult. And you have to support them being a voice for themselves.
And I think women get so much of their self-esteem from their dads too. So I really appreciate this dad's question and that he's concerned about it as well. That speaks a lot to what a great dad he is already.
And can I add?
Please.
And I would also say, I'm a proponent of therapy. And, if you think that depression is a concern and things like that, I would advocate for therapy. Therapy is not a sign of weakness. Doesn't mean you're crazy. It just means it's a safe place for you to go and you can vent and you can talk to somebody to help you process through it. And I know moms that do have some of their daughters that they go to therapy because of the things that you're concerned about. And it has been beneficial for them to navigate all that pressure that is put on young women on what we're supposed to be and what we're supposed to do. So
good point. Anybody else want to comment on that question before we move on?
The only other one, and I have a teenage son, so my perspective is maybe a little different, but I see what some of these girls are doing and they're exposed. Maybe I'm going off on a parenting ledge here. But they're exposed to a lot. TikTok, Snapchat, social media generally, looking at supermodels and things like that. And I think things are changing, right? You see more supermodels or things that are starting to look like real women. But there's a ton of stuff thrown at them, making things look perfect. And I think there's a lot of insecurity for young women. And, my son's in middle school, gosh, it's got to be like the worst time for hormones and insecurities and things like that. I really agree with what Meg said, not just encouraging them to do but really expose them to things and find things that they can get that inner confidence from. I actually didn't have that in the same way growing up. And I think it really hurt me and gave me a lot of issues as a young woman. Quite frankly, I agree with therapy. LaDonna had a lot of therapy, still, have a therapist. And I think it's healthy, right? I used to define myself by my career. And I think for young women, you find things to define yourself buy, but you need to find things you love that it's healthier for. Me defining myself by my career came to a point when I had to make a decision with my kids and the traveling that I was doing every day. And really, then it was like I was sacrificing my own view of myself. And I had a counselor, very powerful question. He said, but what do you enjoy other than? And I said, well, I enjoy my kids. I enjoy like going camping. And I've always wanted to sail. He's like, well, why don't you? Well, I'm always like working. And he's like, so go sail. And I just thought it was like, whoa, yeah, let me go sail. So I'm really big on trying new things, but I sail now. And that is something that I do just for me. I don't do it for my kids. I don't do it for my husband. I don't do it for my job. And it is something that just brings me pure joy. And if you can empower young women to find those things, that will really set them up. I found it later in life. I'm very fortunate, but if I would have found that earlier, I think, I would have been a better leader sooner. I would have been a better mom sooner because I would have had that.
Great answer. I appreciate all of your answers. As we're heading into the home stretch, I just have a couple of more questions for you. This one's a little interesting, but in a recent study by IPSOS UK and the Global Institute for Women's Leadership at King's College, some 52% of Gen Z and 53% of millennials say society has gone so far in promoting women's rights that it is discriminating against men. It makes me think that equality in the workplace is more than just a woman's issue. Anybody would like to comment on that one? Any comments? Laura, you're nodding.
Feel like I talk all the time. My husband has been in women-dominated fields, so I'm going to give a crack at this to maybe give some other people some time to help me out. My husband has been in HR, where he was the only guy, and he's also now he's a teacher, and I think he's one of 2 teachers in the entire, it's an elementary middle school, like a small school, but he's the only guy again. He has had women discriminate for, and I don't think they mean it intentionally, so I'm using the word discrimination, maybe it's too strong, but they have some biases towards what men should be based on their own experience with the men in their life. And so my husband being, the person who's responsible for taking care of our kids after school, because he is a teacher and he has a more flexible schedule, or in HR being the one who got called probably more than I did to come pick up the sick kiddo, although we did try to share and take turns, he got a lot of flack for that, both from women. And then in some cases, there were men in senior roles that were like, what do you mean? Like, I remember I had just had my first baby. I think I was 3 weeks. So LaDonna and everyone was talking about mental health. Oh my God. I called him at like 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And I was like, whatever you're going to do, you better be leaving right now to come home. Because if you don't, like, I'm walking out of this house and the baby's safe in the crib, but I literally physically have to leave this house. And I felt like I was going crazy. And my husband was like, I have an emergency at home. I have to go. And they're like, wait, isn't your wife on maternity leave? And he's like, yep, but I gotta go. Like, I literally had it mentally, physically, I was exhausted. And he left. And it's really, really hard. I think sometimes look at paternity leave. Like, we talk about maternity leave being 4 to 6 weeks. I don't know about you ladies, but I needed someone there for me. It definitely wasn't my mother-in-law. It wasn't my mom. They both had jobs. I had, my first son very young. I really needed my husband there, like really needed him. And I think when we talk about things like, and I'm using this as an example, but when you talk about things like postpartum depression, like you need people there to keep everyone okay and safe. Men do not, paternity leave is not accepted. It is not okay in the US. You look at Canada, the UK, other places, they are okay to take leave. They're okay to share in some of the leave given. In Canada, I think they have like a year or something, and it can be shared between the spouses. Wow. Like, I think that men do get sometimes, in those situations, especially when you're thinking like emotionally and supportively as being a true co-partner in a marriage and in a family. I think they really, the dads who want to do that feel this very keenly.
Good point. Heather?
I think it's interesting. So you said, the study was based out of the UK, and thinking even to what Laura just shared, we view Europe as more progressive when we talk about gender equality and time off, maternity leave, paternity leave, even holidays, just everything that they have in terms of work-life balance. So it's interesting that it came from the UK, because you would expect that maybe in the US, because we're still learning. And I think that's the number one thing I take away from that study, or anytime I hear stats, or even if I hear someone say that, is we're all still learning, getting educated. We're in the middle of this. I don't even know what being out of it looks like, or if that's even something that actually ever even happens. But knowing that everything is still such a new concept talking point for us, we have to talk about it. And that goes to a lot of issues, not just gender equality. But if you don't talk about it, you can never get to a common ground. You can never find what that actual new comfortable place is. But the disruptive place that maybe while everyone is still learning, that's the uncomfortable place. And that's a little bit where we're at right now. And so that's why people might say those things, because if you are disrupting how it has always been, where maybe more has been pushed on females to take care of their kids in the home, or to do the chores, or we talk about mental workload and all of those things, that when you start pushing back, or we start talking about things being more equitable, it does create discomfort. And so that can make people think, oh, we've gone too far, but that's the discomfort talking. And I think where we'll land will actually be this nice, new, natural place. Now, that doesn't mean that place is perfect, and we're not going to continue because we have to have those uncomfortable conversations, or we really won't ever make progress. And I think that if you look back on history, the only times we make progress is really when we have those uncomfortable conversations. And there's always someone saying, hey, we shouldn't do this, but that doesn't make it the right answer.
Great point. Great
I would
point.
like to add to that. I agree with Heather. Sometimes when there is beginning to be pushback on things, there is a feeling of loss and discomfort. And at the same time, I think that's what's happening is historically men are not very good at advocating for what they need in terms of mental health or sharing things, because they're supposed to be, they're supposed to go home and bring home the bacon or whatever that thing. That's what they're supposed to be. They're supposed to be this strong man that works and does all of these things. And I think more of them are starting to say, hey, I want to be very active in my family. I have mental health concerns. I have these other needs. And that is starting to come out as well as as women are advocating for themselves. So I think we're in that discomfort area. And I also think, to Laura's point, we're in that area where you have a large group of men that are like, I want to be very present in the lives of my family. I don't want to just be the person that goes to work and comes home and sits in the recliner and like the old TV shows. I want to be available, and I want to have a balanced life and not just be a working machine. So I think we're in this weird place now where we're shifting. It's starting to shift, and there's a little pushback on that. But
I agree with you. We have a few minutes left. I've got one more question that I'd like all of you to comment on. And Meg, I'm going to start with you on this one. Depending on where you are in your career path, and I know the answers to this will vary, but where do you see yourself in 5-10 years? Do you feel that C-level attainment is possible? And if it is that what you want? Meg?
Well, you know where I am in my career. Yeah. I am I'm looking at the light at the end of the tunnel, and it's not a train. So my path from here is going to be very much focused on obviously family and what makes me happy. I'm an obsessive knitter, those that know me. I'm on the board for the Minnesota Knitting Guild now, and that's a commitment that I just made in the last year, knowing that I would have more time coming up in the next year. I was just voted onto the board of the Textile Center in Minneapolis. And that's, again, that happy place for me. So looking to take that leadership skills and what I have learned in my life and then put it to my passions. And that's where I'm going. And people they're questioning whether I can just flip the light switch on transportation. And we'll see how that happens over the next year or two. But, you know, that's my path from here. And I'm very excited about it.
That's great. Laura, what about you?
Wow. You know, that question, if you asked me when I was younger in my career, I think it would have been an overwhelmingly yes, and I'm going to get there and it's going to be like in 20 years. And now I'm at 17 years and I'm like, oof, maybe someday. And I think that's okay. I think that if you are younger in your career and you have those aspirations, the one piece I would tell you is it's okay for that aspiration to change. And what I want out of life right now is a little different. I have 4 children. I have, you know, a husband who started a new career as a teacher. I am very much hitting a bit of a, yes, I still want to accelerate. I still want to work on myself. I want to feel like I could rise to that level of VP or COO. I don't think CEO is in my path, but COO. And you know, I know I reached out to LaDonna. There may be things I want to do in the future too, about maybe becoming a professor. I love these panels and speaking. So I feel like right now I'm in a very reflective space, even though I'm somewhat young. I'm not yet 40, and I'm really prioritizing my family and saying, well, maybe someday, maybe when they're older, maybe when they're out of the house, but I feel more okay with saying, you know what, I just really want to be better right now. I want to be a better manager and leader. I want to learn, you know, and be more strategic in my thinking. And I'm okay with that. So maybe someday I'll end up there. I hope so. And maybe not. And I'm okay with that too.
Great. Heather, you have so many great examples at JB Hunt to call on. What are your thoughts on this?
You know, so early in the first couple of years in my career, I didn't really know. You're still figuring it out. And yeah, you think, okay, maybe I want to be that CEO, and the dreams that when you're a little kid, you always think, okay, what is that highest role? I want to do that. I don't know that I really, the first couple of years felt that way. And then I hit a groove and I thought, well, maybe. And I don't know that, you know, it is to Laura's point, CEO, but whatever that elevated kind of role is. And I think that's good. I think that that's what drives you forward. And I think you should always have that. What is that next step? And it doesn't necessarily have to be C-level. For me, it's starting to think about SVP and what does that look like? And is that something I'm interested in? And then what would, you know, to your point, Gail, 10 years, because like Laura, I'm also not 40 and starting to think through, you know, I still have a lot of time left in the transportation industry and I still have dreams and I still want to be the best leader I possibly can and focusing on that. And I focus a lot on, I want to develop amazing leaders in this organization also. So do I think that it's a no for the future? No, I still have hope and that still drives me to be better, to perform, and to hopefully inspire. And, you know, I can't wait to see what the future holds. I do often have to think about, because as you move up in an organization, you are exposed to the challenges that come with that role. It's really easy when you are, and I did this when I started, to be like, oh, I bet they have it so easy. You know, they sit in meetings all day and then you know, and that's not at all what happens. And you do realize as you move up, the pressure that they feel, the problems that they work on, the challenges that you face, those are different, and not saying they're bigger, they're different. And the challenge that every person is facing each day is very important. And those challenges don't go away as you increase in title. And so that is something, knowing I only have a 2-year-old, I have to think about. And what does work-life satisfaction mean for me in this next phase of my career?
Great. Thank you, Heather. And LaDonna, bring us home.
So, in 5 years, 5 to 10, I'll be chasing a little one around. Well, I am in my world, I'm an assistant professor. The next step is to become an associate professor. That's when you get tenure. So I'm going up for that in the fall. But in 10 years, I'd hope to be a full professor. That is our C-suite. I mean, beyond if you want to go into administration, which at this point in time, I do not. Administration is being a dean and managing faculty, which is kind of like, wrangling cats. And I'm not sure that's something I want to do, but to become a full professor would be, that's the goal for me right now. That to be a full, you have to have an impact, a societal impact, and an industry impact. And they know your work and you've helped and you've made things better in some way. Is the way that our fools view that. So to be able to say that I had that sort of impact and be a full professor, that's what my ultimate goal is right now. No, you might ask me later, I might say a dean, but I don't think so.
Well, listen, we're out of time now, but I want to thank my panel. I can't think of a better way to finish out Women's History Month than spending this last hour and a half with you guys. So thank you so much for your thoughts and insights. And thanks to all of our attendees who've hung with us. And I hope you got as much out of this as I did. I'd like to wish you all a happy almost end of Women's History Month and a great rest of your day. Thank you.